Hey everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. I want to talk a bit about EGLD and zoom out a little bit and talk about where EGLD sits in the broader scheme of things. If you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like and follow us on Twitter. A lot of updates, better indicators, and more over there. So when looking at assets, it's often easy to kind of get really hyper-focused on the here and now. What is EGLD doing today, or what did it do in the next, past week? What will it do next week? But oftentimes with these kind of assets, the majority of what actually ends up being interesting is not the super local, it's the big picture. If you look at EGLD, getting too worried about what was going on down here would have taken someone away from the opportunity of realizing all of these gains into the future. So today what I want to talk about is kind of where does EGLD sit in the broader scheme of the crypto market, and also talk about where EGLD looks like it is right now kind of in its market cycle and how it compares to other altcoins in terms of its risk to reward profile. So let's go ahead and get going. So the first thing I want to talk about is the EGLD Bitcoin chart. So basically what this is taking the price of EGLD and it's dividing it by the price of Bitcoin. So the way that you can read this is that, the numbers here on the y-axis are basically how many Bitcoin can you buy with one EGLD? How many Bitcoin is one EGLD worth? That's what this is getting at here. And the reason that people look at metrics like this is that it gives you an idea of relative performance. If EGLD is trending up in this chart, that means it's been outperforming Bitcoin. If it's trending down, that means it's underperforming Bitcoin. And so you can see that throughout EGLD's history, it has generally speaking outperformed Bitcoin, at least overall so far. And then more recently, really ever since getting into 2021, it's more or less kind of oscillated against Bitcoin, more or less gone sideways. Another way of thinking of this is it's held its own. It hasn't bled against Bitcoin. It hasn't lost value relative to Bitcoin, but it hasn't made any sustained super high gains. So it's kind of, shot up from its early days and then held that relative strength higher up. And I think it's notable to see that, except for the big low that ended up happening in June for EGLD, ever since then, it's mainly just been holding its own. It's kind of been staying steady. And this is important because one of the things a lot of people talk about with altcoins versus Bitcoin is they say, oh, altcoins are just going to bleed against Bitcoin in a bear market, and that, you should be just getting out of all altcoins and, moving your money into Bitcoin because Bitcoin will go down less. Well, EGLD has not been showing that pattern. EGLD's actually been able to hold up just fine against Bitcoin. Now, it did lose some value, coming off of the highs in November, right? So it did bleed against Bitcoin through this time, but in more recent history, really ever since that big capitulation we got back in June of 22, it's been more or less holding sideways, which is notable because this is, the most bearish it's been. You might expect EGLD to have bled the most against Bitcoin in this kind of time frame. Actually, it hasn't. Really, all it did was kind of give up its gains that it had gained during that big hype cycle going into November when it put in its, all-time high. And then coming back down to earth, kind of into this support range that it built up before. So I think this is notable because, again, it means that EGLD is not acting like maybe what the typical altcoin you might expect would be acting like against Bitcoin. It's not just bleeding out against Bitcoin in these bearish times, which is a sign of relative strength and might mean that, EGLD is not just going to, completely collapse as Bitcoin shows weakness. Now, obviously, we have to be a little bit careful with that. There's nothing to say that EGLD can't collapse below this range and start bleeding out to Bitcoin. But so far, it hasn't shown that behavior, even in the face of all this bearishness, which is just a notable thing to keep in mind, that even in these really nasty conditions, EGLD's been able to hold its value against Bitcoin, which is more than some other altcoins can say. And also, I think maybe even more impressively, honestly, than that is the way that EGLD has been holding its value against Ethereum. So that's what this is. It's the EGLD versus Ethereum chart. So EGLD price divided by the Bitcoin price. And you can see a similar story to Bitcoin where, EGLD gained relative to Ethereum kind of earlier on up through 2021. And then it's kind of more or less just been going sideways, kind of coming down into this support range down here currently. But again, it's been relatively speaking kind of holding its value. It actually had gained massively against ETH in that big capitulation in June because ETH capitulated more than EGLD did. And then, gave up some territory to ETH as ETH kind of rallied into the merge. But now it's just been more or less just kind of going sideways. And again, I think that's impressive and notable because one of the things a lot of people talk about with altcoins is, oh, why don't you just buy Ethereum, right? Altcoins tend to bleed against Ethereum, so why wouldn't you just buy Ethereum? Well, EGLD's, one of the ones that actually hasn't been showing that behavior throughout its life. Now, it doesn't mean it can't start doing that, but so far it has accrued value against ETH, and has so far, even in these really bearish times, been holding its value against ETH. And I think that's just notable, right? Because both ETH and Bitcoin are way larger market cap assets that are considered to be the kind of lowest risk, quote unquote, crypto assets that are out there. The fact that EGLD's been able to kind of ride with them, kind of stay level with them, even in these really bearish times, is notable. It means that not enough people see EGLD as being so risky relative to Bitcoin and Ethereum that they're just going to sell out of EGLD in favor of those other assets. People have actually been willing to hold on, which is a sign of relative strength in these very bearish conditions. So from that perspective of relative value, I'm kind of impressed by how well EGLD has held up so far. It doesn't mean it will continue to necessarily. Who knows what the heck's going to happen if we get a full-on stock market crash or something like that. Everything could go out the window. But so far, barring any extreme event, this is impressive relative performance, and it's notable because a lot of other altcoins have not been able to achieve this same result in these very bearish conditions. Now, to kind of talk about another aspect of EGLD in the more macro sense, I want to flip over to some of the indicators we have here on the channel and talk about the way that EGLD's been performing, and then also some relative comparisons between other assets here in a minute. So first thing I want to talk about is the momentum bias indicator, or MBI, for EGLD. It's an indicator that gets that momentum in the market, and by momentum bias, we mean is the momentum so kind of skewed to the upside that kind of pulls price up along with it, or is it biased to the downside, kind of pulling price down in these bearish conditions? And we can see is that what EGLD's been doing really ever since November of last year is telltale bearish behavior on the MBI. And we've talked about this before. With every asset I've looked at that's gone through a bear market, you'll see this behavior where you get to the deep red, poke your head above zero in a relief rally, try to reestablish positive momentum bias, fail, get rejected to the downside. Price takes another leg to the downside, try to reestablish positive momentum bias, get rejected down, and price moves down again as well. This is telltale bearish signs. So if we're talking about where we are right now, it's still clear that EGLD is still in a bear market, right? We have not seen the kind of indications yet to suggest that the trend is necessarily likely to be changing, or that EGLD's entering a new phase of its market cycle. But what we can look for here is what we'd like to see, coming off of this failed attempt to reestablish positive momentum bias, is for us to not come back down to these really deep red levels back here. And especially we don't want to see us setting a new low. One of the things I think is notable with EGLD on the MBI is this kind of bearish divergence we ended up seeing, actually going from early 2021 into late 2021. You see price moved up, but then the MBI actually moved down, suggesting that momentum was kind of bleeding out of the market over this long period of time. And we've actually just been kind of continuing that downtrend, sitting in, lower highs and lower lows, really throughout, kind of lower highs throughout here, even with this one included. So what you'd like to see is a breaking of that structure on the MBI. You'd like to see us find a bottom and actually start to do this oscillation around zero. And the reason why that's important is this kind of oscillation around zero. EGLD is not old enough to really give a good example of this, but things like Bitcoin, Ethereum show this behavior. When you start oscillating around zero, coming out of these really bearish times, that ultimately is kind of in that accumulation zone that builds into the next bull run. And so if we start seeing that behavior here, that might suggest that this is that accumulation zone that might then lead into that move to the upside. If we don't see that, if we still see this continue to bleed down, then a next leg down for EGLD would be much more likely. So we'd like to see a reversal here soon, and then especially start to spend more time up in the green. Haven't seen that yet, but that's something that we'd want to look for. So from a macro perspective of where is EGLD in its market cycle, we're still very much in the bear market according to the MBI, and we'd like to start seeing some of those signs of transition before getting more confident that that is about to break. So that's kind of where, one of the things I'm looking at to kind of give an idea of where EGLD is. I still think that at best we're going to be entering into accumulation zone, but to think that we're just going to rip into the upside, I think is not especially likely. But again, talking about seeing the forest, not just focusing on the trees, bear markets make you rich. That's the thing that people talk about. Bear markets make you rich, bull markets make you money. And so, for the people who stick around, they tend to be rewarded. And if we look at the risk profile for EGLD, we also see that it's actually in a pretty tasty spot relative to the rest of the market. So if you're not aware, we're actually working to develop a website in collaboration with Jay over at Daily Crypto Analysis. I'll leave a link to his channel in the description. Definitely go check it out if you haven't already. And one of the things that's going to be on that website is live data from our models, and our UDPI risk indicator, upside downside potential indicator, is going to be one of the things that's featured. And this is just a screenshot from the alpha of the website that we're working on right now. And what this can do is give us a sense of where EGLD sits relative to other crypto assets in its risk profile. So if you're not familiar, the UDPI ranges from -5, which is the lowest level of risk, up all the way up to 5, which is kind of the highest level of risk. And what you can see is that EGLD, which I've highlighted, sits down right here, is pretty, favorable risk reward, especially relative to some other crypto assets. It's sitting much more favorably than something like Cosmos, Atom, for example, which has actually been performing, a lot of relative strength currently. It's better than something like Chainlink, better than ADA, better than XRP, better than BNB, better than ETH, even better than Bitcoin. It has a pretty decent risk profile right now, which is suggesting that overall, EGLD, on the long-term perspective, kind of in the coming months to years, it's quite a bit more upside and downside potential. The model sees as being realistic. Same for more in the medium term, weeks to months, and the short-term days to weeks. And so just from the number on its own, that's sitting well for EGLD. And then also even relative to the rest of the crypto market is also sitting relatively favorably. It's not the most favorable risk-reward profile of all of these, but it's decent. And again, the caveat with all of this is that, if we do get a full-on, stock market meltdown, or if the bond market completely breaks or something like that happens, who knows what's going to happen after that. But, short of something like that happening, if historical trends are predictive of the future, this is the kind of moment for the people who stick around and are willing to, bear with the bear market, not to use that as a pun. That's when you end up making all the money, because you're getting in at these really favorable prices that you can then ride up into the next bull run into those big multiples. That's where the big money is made. It's not the people who FOMO in, getting up towards the top. You might make a little bit of money if you can trade that perfectly, but the people who are going to be really happy are the ones who got in down here and are still way up currently, even though price has fallen way off the all-time high. And certainly someone who would have traded the market cycle would have been a lot more happy. And of course, that's something that an indicator like the UDPI helps to do, is to trade these market cycles, selling the peaks, buying the lows, and really trying to compound profits throughout the volatility. And so obviously not financial advice, you should make your own decisions. But with EGLD, unless we get, some big bearish event to kind of push us in the next leg down in the bear market, DCAing in here seems quite reasonable. Now, again, not financial advice, you should make your own opinions, but historically speaking, these are the types of moments that tend to work out quite well. And again, because EGLD's been acting so strong against things like ETH and like Bitcoin, that's a vote of confidence in its favor. I think I'd be a lot more concerned about EGLD if it was just continuing to break down to new lows against Bitcoin and Ethereum in these bearish times. That would suggest to me that people don't have as much confidence in it as you would like, that they're, preferring Bitcoin and Ethereum, and selling out of EGLD to a greater extent and driving the price down further. Now, again, anything's going to happen, and by no means does this mean that EGLD is guaranteed to just go blasting off, or that it's guaranteed to not see new lows from here. But relatively speaking, it's showing some relative strength, or at least being able to keep on par with the other big assets in the space. And it has a decent risk reward profile. But again, the warning sign is that with the MBI, it's still very much in a bear market. So I'm certainly not trying to call a bottom here for EGLD by any means. Moving down is very plausible. But if historical trends continue, and if we don't get really bearish events happening in the macro space, I think that's the big open question with all of this right now. Then this could end up being a point we look back on as being a very, very favorable point for EGLD. All right, if you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like and follow us on Twitter. A lot of updates, better indicators, and more over there.